So we're back with Barbara and we have a good view, so we thought we'd chat a bit more.
Just thought we'd have a chat about land security, because that's always an issue with urban sites. This, as we said, we've been here since 2016 and the land is leased from VicTrack, but it's on a month-by-month lease, so it's very insecure. By comparison, at Moorabbin Airport, that's on a 30-year lease, so they've got completely different issues to us. In a sense, though, this garden is sort of very portable because all of the soil's been laid on black plastic and we operate out of shipping containers. In theory, we could sort of up and move somewhere else, although it would be an enormous
Gigantuan task,
yeah. But you got to think that with like apartments being built on the train lines, and there's one just over there, and there's plans for a bus turning circle further down. You know, this land is potentially looked at for other uses.
Right, so that's, of course, that block, which is obviously relatively recent, is really smack bang on the train line, right? So
yeah. So as far as we know, VicTrack don't have any plans to develop this, but that's always sort of something in the back of our mind. If we wanted to invest in this site, you need to think about how long we're going to be here for. So.
You know, and I guess that brings up, in a way, what's happening now, the pandemic, which is that, I'm just thinking out loud here, that you know, we're in a recession, we're in it now, and property's being affected badly. We're going to have a net loss of migration that fuels property development. I mean, maybe that's going to affect the thinking about sort of rapidly developing this site. I've just, you know.
Might do. Conversely, there's also been a lot of talk about a need for more social housing.
Okay,
so,
yep.
Who knows? It's just that uncertainty factor, I think, that we just have to live with.
That's a really good point, actually. There has been a lot of discussion about social housing, and just for everyone, you know, watching this is technically public land. This is VicTrack, so it's owned by the government. And if there's a push towards more social housing, this would be the sort of land that would be targeted. That's a really good point.
I think so.
Yeah. But normally the approach has been for the last, let's say, 10-15 years, it's been government agencies sell land to private developers and build that with very token percent, 5% social housing. That's, isn't it? That's if that.
Yeah.
Half the time. Yeah. Barbara, it just looks fantastic seeing the rows down here, and you can see the brown drip line there. What's the kind of thinking around, if you know, how do you sort of manage water, I guess, on site is where I'm headed with the question.
Yeah. So water is one of our biggest expenses because we're on mains water here.
Yeah.
And the drip irrigation is fantastic. So we've got a number of controller boxes around the site, about 8 of them. So we program those depending on where we're at in the season.
Right.
What we've found though is that because of the shape of the beds, after about 15 minutes we get runoff.
Wow.
Quite a lot of runoff. So
right.
I tend to run it for no longer than 15 minutes, maybe twice a day, just to make sure that most of it's soaking in instead of running away down the sides of the beds.
So this is so interesting, because it's that old obvious story. I think you have to get to know a site. You have to be there. You get to know what its behaviour is, and with drip you can just. I mean, I've seen it in gardens before where you think drip is slow, which it is, and therefore none of it's wasted. But if you go too hard, I've seen it flowing out of gardens before.
Yeah, and it really does with the shape of these beds.
Yeah.
Big difference. So I mean, at this time of the year we're running it just say once a week for 15 minutes, but a month or two back we were running it twice a week for 30 minutes. In the summer we're running it almost every day sometimes when it's really hot.
Sure.
For 30 minutes at a time. So we do use a lot of water. We don't have any access to mulch. So no sort of donated supplies of mulch, and it's not something that we can budget for. So it means that our watering isn't as efficient as it could be. And as you can see, we have a problem with weeds all the time. So, and actually that's one other thing you might find interesting. We grow a lot of our crops here from seedlings, but we've been using seeds for some of them, and we find because we don't have any mulch, by the time the seeds come up, the weeds have come up, and it's getting really difficult to manage the seeds and the weeds at the same time. So.
Well, I think that is a massive advantage of planting seedlings. So, like the experience in the Burnley plots with this class is that because the weeds there, as you probably remember, Barbara, just explode if you don't mulch properly.
Yeah.
So you have that, it is less labour intensive overall, isn't it? Because you don't have to get in there so early and rescue the young seedlings if they're planted.
You've got so much bare ground.
Yeah. You know, all this stuff is so important.
So at the moment, you'll see that our beds aren't too bad. We're sort of keeping on top of those because it's the changeover of the season, so we've been focused on that. But the paths have gone a bit crazy. So up the back, outside the fence, you might see a huge pile of shredded green waste that the council's dropped off.
Yep.
So we'll hoe those paths and put the mulch down there. But of course, we can't put that on the beds.
It's such a pity, isn't it? You can't really put wood chips on beds.
No.
It's just
You get the nitrogen
it ends up.
Yeah.
You end up, you know, in tears or whatever the saying is. It's very tempting, isn't it? I think maybe, you know, I do think about this. I think with, like, if you're doing a big pumpkin patch, you know, widely, you know, you can afford to use wood chips or arborist waste there because they're sprawling right over. But whenever you do it, like something like that, in between leaks, or you just end up with the chips in the beds long term, and as you say, structural issues with roots and nitrogen drawdown and all that. But
so
anyway,
to the right, you see some of the bed preparation that we do, and it's quite labour intensive.
Yeah.
What we find is that we start off with these nice rectangular beds like the one at the front, and then by the end of the season, the sides have slumped, so they end up a lot more sort of curved and just naturally a bit compacted from the rain and so on.
Yeah.
So we have to reform the sides. It's a bit like making a sandcastle at times. You've got to sort of hold the side up and form them with your hands to get that rectangular shape.
So it's like a flat planting bed, not a...
But before we do, we rake away any of the mulch from the paths to make sure that we don't get it on the beds.
Okay.
Yeah, then we turn them over and fertilise.
So that reminds me, I've meant to ask you, what was your master's research project? You know,
it was all around growing food crops. So looking at the kind of veggie mixes that you can get from soil yards and seeing how they performed.
Any you know, profound takeaways or conclusions from that?
Yeah, be really wary about buying veggie mix from the soil yard. It's generally speaking, its physical properties are pretty good. It'll drain well, and retain moisture well. But the chemical properties are going to be completely out. Usually the pH is really high. It's around 7.5, 8, 8.5. Whereas of course vegetables like around a 6 to 7. The organic matter is usually really, really high. So the salinity is extremely high, and that'll affect things like carrots in particular, beans also.
So what's going on there? That's measured by EC, is it? Is that what you did?
That's measured by EC, The reason it's high is that they add a huge amount often of mushroom compost, also very alkaline, and cow manure. Both of those processes have a lot of salt in them.
Yeah.
And so those salts in there, so all nutrients are salts, but the kind of salts that we're worried about are the sodium and chloride. So they're the ones that cause the problems with the vegetables. They're very sensitive to salt levels.
That's gold, Barbara. We should publicise. I mean, that's that's really important for people to know. I mean, I know here that the pH was through the roof when they first. I mean, it does go down, doesn't it? Obviously. Eventually.
It's very slow. Yeah. It's much easier to bring it up than it is to take it down.
That's for sure. And it's pretty brutal when you have to bring it down, like chucking on nitrogen fertiliser
or sulphur, which is a pretty horrible way of doing it. It takes months as well. So
so that's great knowledge for you to bring here too. It must inform your management a little bit, like
keep growing the crops and harvesting them, and that helps to remove some of that and help to get it under control. So using your compost will help to manage the organic matter a lot better and improve the structure. But
it's interesting, isn't it? Do you find obviously one of the things I'm interested in is how, you know, science gets translated or even slightly mistranslated to sort of popular horticulture sometimes. So, you know, I like to joke that it's a great time to be an invertebrate or an insect, because everyone sort of thinks you're beneficial now, or worms are in, and like, an organic matter's like that too, isn't it? Everyone thinks, whoa, just keep piling on the organic matter, and I mean, there is a limit.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, all these things like mushroom compost, for example, they're good in their own right.
Yeah.
There's a limit to how much you should be adding, and I think the soil yards are just adding far more than they should be. The other, I think, problem with the soil yards is that they're really bulk processes. They bring in huge amounts, they whack it together and they send it out, And so they don't test their products. If you
Right.
try and ask for test results, you won't be able to get any. And if you do, it won't relate to the batch that you've got. The batches really vary from one month to the next. They're completely different.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, basically, it's rough as guts, isn't it?
Totally.
Yeah. It's, I mean, this sort of stuff, you could talk about it all day. I mean, I guess we're all winging it a bit, aren't we? But if you know the basics, like even just to be able to measure pH is a really useful thing, right? Like, and and this is probably a conversation for another time, but I went to an agroforestry property in the Otways a couple of years ago with a different class from William Angliss, and it was fascinating there talking to, you know, they'd been there for generations and they'd really only just worked out that their soils just naturally were incredibly acid. And so to raise the pH was going to take, I mean, it was something like, I don't know if it was a duplex soil, I don't think that's true, but it was the pH was so low, it was like 3 or something, about 30 centimeters. Anyway, the point was, it's not something you can just magically fix, quote unquote, right? And so it was just the level of honesty that they had to confront about their management was fascinating. But that's a little bit off topic from this site. But okay, wow, it's just also interesting, and that stuff about the security is really fascinating. I was saying to Shani earlier, I'll just quickly get your thoughts on this, that I love this site because of the fact that it's actually super organised. You've got paid staff like you and Shani, you know, over all your sites. You bring in the volunteers, and I like how I think individual plots, like allotments, are great in community gardens, but I think volunteers that you use here, it would seem to me, get as much satisfaction from coming to an organised site with a professionally run crop system than necessarily having to have all that responsibility for a few square metres. I mean...
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Some of the volunteers have plots in community gardens.
Okay.
But a lot of them are in apartments or smaller properties, and they don't. So this is where they do their gardening.
And yeah, so I guess my point is that a mixture of different types of sites is really important, and this still is fairly unique, which is a pity, I think. Like, I think there's a really good argument to have more, you know, it could be half the size of this, but done on this, using this method of... Because you've probably got, what, here at the moment, 5 or 6 crops in only, is it? Or maybe, I mean, excluding the herbs, I guess.
Different ones,
Yeah.
Probably 5 or 6.
Yeah. So...
I mean, one of my favourite parts of this job is in a non-corona environment.
Yeah, sure.
Bringing in the corporate groups on a Friday. So
Right.
They're people who sit at their desk all day, every day, and they just love it when they come here. They're so full of energy and enthusiasm.
Right.
It's really fun.
Yeah, corporate volunteers, they're like dogs off the leash, aren't they,
They
sometimes?
are, they're usually like the hardest jobs I can give them, which is great, so I save them up.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Barbara. That was really interesting. And I'm just going to ask you, is your master's report available as a PDF? Would you be happy for people to...
Yeah, I'd be happy for you to have a look at it.
All right.
It's not available at the moment, but...
Okay, I'll email and that'd be great. All right, thanks so much. See ya.